The first thing the council noticed was that the humans did not argue. They did not protest the ruling. They did not threaten sanctions or military retaliation. They did not even ask for clarification. When the Galactic Assembly's decision was transmitted, access to the Interstellar Exchange Network denied, provisional membership revoked, Sol system classified as non-participatory civilization, the human ambassador simply lowered her eyes, nodded once, and said, "Understood." That was the moment several observers later admitted should have frightened them, because civilizations that understand what they are losing do not respond with calm, and yet humanity did. Within 3 cycles, every human vessel had withdrawn from shared transit corridors. Within 6, their diplomatic envoys had vacated council space. Within 10, Sol went silent, not hostile, not collapsed, silent. That was the first mystery. The second was a stranger. Long-range observation buoys stationed at the edge of human territory began reporting something statistically impossible: traffic. Not outward, but inward. Human ships, slow, inefficient, chemically propelled relics by galactic standards, were returning home from distant colonies and independent mining claims. They were abandoning expansion. The third mystery emerged 32 cycles after expulsion, when trade analysts across 5 major powers noticed a ripple in resource markets. Human contracts had not defaulted, they had been fulfilled. Every outstanding shipment of rare isotopes, every agricultural export, every medical compound delivered ahead of schedule, meticulously, precisely, as if humanity had known the ruling was coming, as if they had prepared. The Council interpreted this as damage control, a species bracing for economic isolation. They were wrong. On Earth, in a modest apartment overlooking what used to be the shoreline of the Pacific, Dr. Mara Iqbal stared at the message confirming her laboratory's funding termination. Global science exchange suspended, it read. Access to shared galactic databases revoked. Behind the clinical language was a harsher truth. Humanity had been deemed too unstable for integration, too impulsive, too violent, too emotionally erratic. Statistical models compiled by 12 elder species had concluded that human decision-making exhibited dangerous variance under stress. They were cooperative, yes, but unpredictably so. Capable of altruism one moment and catastrophic escalation the next. The Council had called it a precaution. Mara read the message twice, then closed it. Across the room, her younger brother Sami was sitting on the floor, assembling a cracked environmental sensor array from discarded parts. "They really did it?" he asked without looking up. "Yes." "Are we in trouble?" she hesitated. "Yes, but not in the way he meant." Sami's lungs had been degrading for 3 years. A rare autoimmune cascade triggered by a pathogen carried on a council trade vessel during first contact. The treatment protocol, effective but prohibitively complex, had relied on alien-manufactured nanotherapeutics. Those shipments had stopped that morning. The Council believed cutting trade would pressure humanity into behavioral reform. They expected protests, appeals, concessions. They did not expect silence. What they did not know, what they could not have known, was that 3 years earlier, when the first whispers of expulsion had circulated through diplomatic channels, a small coalition of human scientists had begun preparing for exactly this scenario. Mara had been one of them. The official project name was unremarkable, Autonomous Resilience Initiative. The unofficial one was darker: if they leave. If the galaxy turned away, what would break first? Medicine, energy distribution, data networks, supply chains, psychological stability. The models were brutal. Humanity's globalized systems depended heavily on off-world components. Remove them abruptly and cascading failures were inevitable. Unless you rewrote the dependencies. The Council had assumed humans were addicted to galactic infrastructure. They misinterpreted adaptability as reliance. Within 40 cycles of expulsion, the first Council monitoring probe detected an anomaly in Sol's outer orbit. A structure, massive, crude, assembled from decommissioned cargo hulls and asteroid-mined alloy. It emitted no weapon signatures, no active shields, no broadcast signals. Just a narrow-band gravitational distortion consistent with experimental drive physics, physics humanity was not supposed to understand. The Council's Science Division concluded it was an act of desperation, a failed attempt to replicate faster-than-light transit without access to sanctioned technology. They dispatched a remote drone to observe. The drone never returned, not destroyed, not attacked. It simply lost telemetry as if space itself had swallowed it. The Council filed the incident under human technical instability. They did not escalate. On Earth, Mara watched the live feed from the prototype facility buried beneath the Andes. Phase lattice stable, an engineer reported. Containment, she asked. Within tolerance, she exhaled slowly. They were not building a weapon. They were building a bridge, not through space, through isolation. The galaxy's FTL network relied on stabilized corridors, predictable, regulated, dependent on Council-controlled anchor points. Humanity was attempting something else, a drive that did not require permission. It was inefficient, dangerous, likely to fail catastrophically, but it was theirs, and that distinction mattered more than safety. The first test nearly tore the structure apart. 2 technicians died when a misaligned field sheared through a maintenance ring. The Council's distant sensors registered a spike in exotic radiation and concluded the project had imploded. They relaxed. Humans, they decided, were proving the wisdom of expulsion, emotionally driven, reckless. Then 90 cycles later, a human vessel vanished from Sol orbit without entering a registered corridor. It reappeared 12 light-years away, off course, damaged, but intact. The Council's reaction was not fear, it was irritation. Unauthorized FTL was a violation of interstellar law. They issued a formal reprimand to a species that no longer answered transmissions. That was the 4th mystery. Why build a way out and not use it? Because the ship did not leave Sol again. Instead, it returned, repeatedly, testing, refining, as if humanity was less interested in escape than in proving something. Mara did not celebrate the successful jump. She went home and watched Sami struggle to breathe through another coughing fit. The last of the alien nanotherapeutics had failed. Human-designed substitutes were not ready. "You should rest," he whispered between breaths. She almost laughed. Rest. The Council believed humans escalated when threatened, but they misunderstood what kind of threat mattered. Economic sanctions, political humiliation, those produced noise. Sick children produced resolve. Within a year of expulsion, every major human government had quietly redirected military budgets toward infrastructure redundancy. Warships were dismantled for raw materials. Defense AIs were repurposed to optimize food distribution. Satellite arrays were reconfigured into solar amplification networks. The Council observed the demilitarization and reached a comforting conclusion. Humanity had accepted its diminished status. They were wrong again. The military had not disappeared. It had been internalized. Every hospital became a fortress against scarcity, every farm a strategic asset, every research lab a front line. Humans did not rally around pride, they rallied around vulnerability. And vulnerability, the Council would eventually learn, was a far more durable motivator. 3 years into isolation, something else began to trouble the Assembly. Human emissions, data traffic, power output, industrial signatures were increasing, not declining. Economic models predicted contraction. Instead, productivity climbed. Self-sufficiency indexes improved. Even more unsettling, human cultural broadcasts, those not encrypted, contain no overt propaganda, no calls for vengeance. Just work. Documentaries about rebuilding supply chains. Public debates about ethical automation. Music. The Council dispatched a covert observer vessel to the edge of Sol space. Its captain, an elder from a species that had achieved stability millennia earlier, expected to witness desperation. Instead, she watched orbital habitats under construction. Not weapons platforms, habitats, rotating cylinders stitched together from scrap and ingenuity. Why expand population centers when resources were constrained? Why invest in long-term growth during isolation? The captain submitted her report with a single line flagged for review. Humans behave as if exile is permanent and survivable. That line unsettled the Council more than any radiation spike. Because civilizations expecting readmission behave differently. They lobby, they reform, they signal compliance. Humanity did none of these. They were not trying to come back. They were trying to outlast, and that realization marked the first flicker of concern. On Earth, Sami's condition worsened. The human nanotherapy prototypes failed twice, then 3 times. Each iteration improved marginally, but not enough. Mara began sleeping in the lab. She stopped attending global coordination calls. One night, as Sami's oxygen levels dipped dangerously low, she made a decision that violated every ethical guideline she had once defended. She authorized human trials before regulatory approval. On her brother. The council would have called it emotional instability. Desperation. They would not have understood the calculation. The probability of success was 18%. The probability of death without intervention was 94. Humans did not require certainty to act. The treatment nearly killed him. For 47 minutes his heart stopped twice. When it stabilized, the autoimmune markers began to recede. Not cured, but halted. Mara wept in a sterile corridor while technicians whispered about precedent. Word spread. Not through official channels, through families. If they leave, we adapt. If they deny, we build. If we fail, we try again. The council noticed another anomaly 5 years after expulsion. Human exploration vessels, using their unstable independent drives, began appearing near unclaimed regions of space, not resource-rich sectors, dead zones, areas considered economically worthless, radiation saturated, gravitationally chaotic. Why would a species already struggling for self-sufficiency invest in colonizing hazards? The council theorized incompetence. Then one of those worthless regions erupted. A stellar instability cascade, rare but devastating, sent a shockwave through adjacent trade corridors. 2 council member systems were crippled, supply lines fractured, FTL anchors destabilized, panic rippled through the assembly, and from the dead zone a human transmission emerged. Not a threat, a warning, time-stamped 3 years earlier. Humans had been monitoring the instability. They had settled nearby not to exploit resources, but to study the anomaly, to understand it, to prepare. They transmitted predictive models, mitigation strategies, engineering schematics, open source, unencrypted. The council's pride hesitated. Then reality intervened. They used the human data. It worked. Not perfectly, but enough to prevent collapse. For the first time since expulsion, the council addressed Saul directly. "Your assistance is acknowledged," the speaker transmitted. There was a delay before the response arrived. "We did not assist you," Mara's recorded voice replied. "We studied a star. You chose to use the data." The distinction unsettled them. Humans were not offering reconciliation. They were behaving as if the galaxy were simply another environmental variable, unpredictable, potentially dangerous, worth understanding anyway. The re-evaluation began quietly. Perhaps expulsion had been premature. Perhaps integration could be reconsidered. But then came the 5th miscalculation. A fringe council faction interpreted humanity's growing independence as a strategic threat. An unsupervised species developing unsanctioned FTL and resilient infrastructure could destabilize the balance of power. They proposed containment. Not war, just pressure. Trade blockades around human exploratory outposts. Interference with independent drive tests. Subtle disruptions. Humanity's response was not military. It was dispersal. Colonies did not consolidate. They fragmented. Small, self-contained habitats seeded across multiple star systems. Harder to monitor, harder to pressure. The council interpreted this as fear. Retreat. Then one of the fringe factions' blockades failed, not because humans attacked it, but because the human colony it targeted voluntarily evacuated. They left behind infrastructure rigged not with explosives, but with automated knowledge archives. Agricultural techniques optimized for marginal worlds, medical databases, environmental stabilization algorithms. When council forces occupied the abandoned habitat, they found a message. Use it if you need it. No demands, no conditions. The fringe faction had expected defiance. They found generosity, and that frightened them more, because it suggested humans were not thinking in terms of sides. They were thinking in terms of continuity. Mara stood beside Sami on a balcony overlooking a city powered entirely by locally manufactured reactors. He was stronger now, not fully healed but alive. "You think they'll let us back in?" he asked. She watched a launch streak toward orbit. "I don't think that's the question anymore." "What is?" She hesitated. "How long we can keep going?" The Council's final realization came too late. A second stellar cascade, larger than the first, threatened the core trade nexus. Models predicted irreversible fragmentation of the FTL network. Civilizations that had depended on stability for millennia faced collapse. They turned, almost instinctively, toward Sol. Human independent drives had never integrated into the Council's corridor system. They were inefficient but self-contained, not reliant on anchor points. In isolation, humanity had built a parallel mobility framework. Slower, messier, but resilient. The request for assistance was transmitted with formal humility. "Will you share transit access?" The pause that followed stretched across light years. On Earth, the decision fractured governments. Some argued for leverage, for conditions, for justice. Mara listened to the debates and felt something colder than anger. If they leave, that had been the premise, but they hadn't left. They had simply withdrawn permission to depend on them. She recorded a message, not as a diplomat but as a scientist. "You misjudged us," she said, "not because we are stronger, but because we continue, even when it is irrational, even when it hurts." She thought of Sami's stopped heart, of technicians lost to drive failures, of abandoned colonies. "We built a way to survive without you, not to punish you, to ensure that no decision, yours or ours, could end us." The council chambers were silent as her final words translated. "If you need access, we will provide it, not because you deserve it. Because collapse helps no one." The vote passed. Human transit nodes opened. Refugee vessels from destabilized systems began arriving in Sol's outer habitats. Humans rationed their own growth to accommodate them. The cost was immediate: resource strain, political tension, cultural friction. And yet they did not close the gates. Years later, when the Council finally reinstated humanity as a full member, the language of the Charter had changed. Autonomous development was no longer grounds for expulsion. Resilience metrics were valued alongside stability, and buried in the revised protocols was a clause inspired by a species once deemed too unstable. No civilization shall be denied the right to prepare for isolation. In private briefings, elder species spoke of humanity with a tone that mixed admiration and unease. They were not the most advanced, not the strongest. But they were the only ones who, when told they were no longer welcome, did not try to force their way back in. They built a world that did not require welcome, and when the galaxy faltered, it was not human weapons or fleets that shifted the balance. It was their refusal to stop building after rejection. The Council had believed exile would weaken them. Instead, it revealed something far more dangerous. Humans did not collapse when excluded. They adapted. They did not escalate when insulted. They endured, and when the galaxy finally understood what humanity had done in the silence after expulsion, it was not awe that settled over the assembly. It was the quiet, irreversible realization that the species they had once turned away had been preparing, not for revenge, but for the day everyone else would fail. And unlike every other civilization that had ever faced systemic collapse, humanity had already answered the question the galaxy was only beginning to ask. What do you do when there is no one left to help you? You continue, even if you have to build the entire future alone.